Well, yeah. So just talking about like those, like the real black bag organizations and stuff like that. So May, you have some flashbacks to May when she was of May when she was a kid, and one of her mantras is "I am a bullet, I am a bullet, I'm a bullet." And definitely throughout the book, she's trying to figure out for herself, like, was she drawn to this type of job because of the person she already had in her? Did that develop it? Did the person, was she developed as this type of person, kind of morally neutral, morally ambiguous? Was that developed just by going into that job? So I wonder kind of like how you thought about her, like in painting her personality, and how much her history had to play with her, being a bullet and being somebody who does some pretty dirty work.
Yeah, I hope that it comes off in the book as complex and that you can't pin it on one thing. But you're right. And I think this is true of most people. The raw materials are innate in part and then formed by your family in part. And so, it's not a big part of the book, but it just talks about the fact that like she grew up in a household where people didn't say what they thought, and you
Mm-hmm.
had to kind of suss out what was going on, and these like, discussions that happened beneath the surface. And I do think people from my part of the country, and in the Midwest largely, I think sometimes you can see that conversations that happen that are never straightforward, never direct, and
Mm.
that laid a part of her personality, and then even deeper, her family's specific dysfunctions taught her not just how to lie, but how to like exist as different people in different places, and
Yeah, yeah.
and to read rooms and to suss out interior motivations and things like that. And then when she gets to LA and she falls into this job, I think this is also true, that there were a lot of jobs that she could have had where maybe this wouldn't have come out or would have just been
Mm.
a part of her. Um, but she found this job, and then importantly, she was conditioned and born to not leave it, which I think is a thing that we talk about, and it comes up in the book, is the idea that the people who leave you stop thinking about,
Mm-hmm.
that it feels like this is the world, and May and Chris both kind of exist in a world that is small but that they feel is like representative of the way the whole world works.
Yeah.
And part of that is because they never leave.
Mm-hmm.
Now you might leave and find another world that is just as bad as this one, but like, I always just think that the stuff, even in a much smaller sense, the way that TV writing is dysfunctional feels normal to me, and we talk about it, but
Mm-hmm.
we don't act on it, and we feel like this is the way it has to be, because the people who can't stand the way the world is, who can't, I'm not putting it as like toughness, like it's
Sure.
better to stay than to leave. I don't believe that at all. But like, oh, the people who leave are gone. I
Mm.
mean, that might sound like obvious, but I just mean there's nobody around who can't hack it, who can't exist in this world, because if you can't exist, you leave, and then you kind of stop existing.
Yeah. It closes the ranks, right?
Yeah, and I think so much of we talked a lot about police stuff, but like a lot of the problems with police culture is that it's a closed society with an in group and an out group, and
Mhm.
again, it's a society and a culture that if you're a cop, most of your friends are going to be cops. It can be a family thing,
Mhm.
and I think a lot of different cultures are like that, but it can be a very bad culture because it allows um, these beliefs or instances or activities that might seem ludicrous to
Hmm.
start to feel very normal.
Yeah.
Like May has some self-awareness because I like to write characters who have self-awareness. I never, and other people can do it and get away with it. I don't like writing characters who I feel better than, or I think I'm
Mm.
presenting myself. I
Mhm.
don't like to write a character where I know they're being just stupid and a liar, but that's okay.
Yeah.
That's just not my interest. Like, I mean, they're liars, but like, I don't want to feel better than the people I write about.
Hmm. Very interesting. You mentioned earlier that scene from Goodfellas where, they're talking about all of them really just hung out together.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
I'm always wondering about, like, I think that's so interesting in TV shows and movies, how like there's like a picture, like it's supposedly a picture of Jimmy Conway, De Niro's character.
Yeah.
Like did they take that picture and then they started filming? You know what I mean? It's like very meta, like a picture within a picture kind of thing.
Oh yeah, and I mean, I've done it on TV shows, and
Yeah, I bet.
you oftentimes do it very early
Okay.
in the production or before you start filming, so that you can like take a picture of them and then cut their hair, and give them the haircut they're going to have for the rest of the thing.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So it's your one chance to kind of to mess with people. So,
Oh yeah,
you
that
know,
makes
if
sense.
you have a character in a TV show whose head is shaved the
Mhm.
entire time you know him, and then they show you a picture later on of him with a full head of hair, it'll feel like that picture was taken 3 years ago.
No doubt.
You
No doubt
know,
about it. You were
and
talking
yeah.
so you were talking about like Midwest and kind of like kind of some of the ethic there. I mean, is that like a corollary of like Midwest nice?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think so. Like my partner Megan is from Minnesota, and
Hmm.
and she grew up in the world of Minnesota nice, but she had
Yes.
moved there as a child, so she wasn't completely
Okay.
part of it. And it's a thing that like drives her crazy because she's like they will not say what's going on, and so I think that's another version of it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so that short flashback was kind of like her family members kind of like eating their shame, and not literally necessarily eating their shame like, taking it out with food, but just like swallowing their shame type of thing, right?
Yeah,
But
and just stuffing things down, just
yeah,
trying to stuff things down. Yeah.
exactly. You capitalize the unsaid, the word unsaid, you capitalize it multiple times throughout. And that's serves as a theme of sorts. I mean, we just talked about that with us pushing the shame down, pushing things down. Towards the end, and this isn't giving anything away, but there's a really interesting, like I want to say monologue or just like piece from May, and just talking about like how it's an ugly world out there, and there are so many things that are unsaid. And yes, people do say things about, okay, our iPhones are made by basically child, 10-year-olds, 8-year-olds making, working for a living, those type of things, and all those things that are left unsaid. And I guess for all you can say about May, she says most of those things, right? She's
Right.
open. Yeah.
But
Oh,
oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Oh, I was say, and I think I said this in a different form earlier, but she's struggling with that thing that I think is so important right now of being so aware that there's so much injustice in the world that is so systemically baked in that we're
Mhm.
we're supposed to just treat it as an unstoppable force of nature, that it
Right.
couldn't be another way. And there's another thing that I think is a really important, theme of the novel that she comes to very late, when she is up in the hills at a film shoot, and Hannah Hurd has just thrown a horrible fit, and she
Hmm.
has learned a lot of dark secrets, and she just has this very strong feeling like this is not the way the world is supposed to be.
Hmm.
Which doesn't mean that there's some other way it is supposed to be,
Yeah.
but it does mean that this sense of certainty that we have with our society, that this is it, there's no other way to be, this is the only way to
Hmm.
be, is untrue, and that we give ourselves passes
Hmm.
on our the fact that we don't have to talk about these things, exactly what
Yeah.
you're saying, that we can leave the truth about our iPhones unsaid, where if we had to go to that factory and look at that little kid, we wouldn't feel the same way that we do right now. And we all know that. We all know that. And yet,
And yet,
and so that's the thing. And I again, it's what I struggle with in my life, and what I'm trying to articulate in a more exciting way with May's life, is this idea that, okay, if you accept that this isn't the way the world is supposed to be,
hmm,
then what?
right, right.
Yeah,
Not a lot of
that's
solutions, right? I mean, we know what the issues, like you said, but doesn't mean we have a better plan necessarily.
right,
Or
but
execute it.
exactly. But then you get back right to that place of like, well, then I guess I can't. If I feel bad, I
Cyclical.
guess that's good enough, and that is the thing that I know isn't true. And again,
Hmm.
I'm not saying what everyone should do with their lives. This is again a big part of what I wrestle with personally, and so that's what
Yeah.
I always feel like bad art is when you write about a thing that you're certain about. Like
Hmm.
when you know better, you know what the answer is, and you're going to tell everybody. That to me tends to be bad. But when you fly into the place where you don't know what the answer is, where you don't know what to do, that's when I think you're dealing with something interesting.
Especially in this unbelievable, dystopian world that you couldn't even make up. In 2023, all things have happened. Like somebody who actually thinks they know what's know things, you know what I mean? I'm just like, yeah, you lost me there, You lost me there. Who knows anything these days, like at all about
Well,
anything,
that's a big part of the book too, is
right?
trying to figure out how to figure out what that is, and not
Hmm.
just sinking into that kind of like the soft nihilism that's so
Yes.
easy to sink into.
Yes. I'm thinking of Flea from the movie The Big Lebowski. Do you remember that? He was a
Oh,
nihilist.
he was the nihilist. Yeah.
I don't believe in nothing.
But yeah, I think we all in modern American society anyway embrace some kind of like what I'm saying, like soft nihilism of like,
Mm,
well,
yeah.
I don't know, what am I going to do, and that's what I'm trying to break myself out of. And again, I'm not saying that as in a preaching way because I'm trying, I'm not
Yes.
succeeding. So
Yeah. I appreciate it. You're obviously really good, through your TV work and all of that. You're really good with dialogue. The
thank you.
dialogues you have, from like Cyrus and Helen towards the end, that again, so many good plot points. We're gonna leave them alone for the reader. But that Beverly Hills Steakhouse,
Mm-hmm.
right? Helen, I just love the way that she speaks, and I can picture the whole scene, and I can picture her haircut. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Just the kind of prim and proper, but just like dropping daggers,
Yeah.
right?
And saying things, it wasn't my editor. I don't remember who it was. And I don't agree with this, but
Hmm.
I had at least one early reader who said, and Helen's correct about everything she says.
Oof.
And again, it's that thing of like, well, what are you going to do? You can join us and be rich,
Mm-hmm.
or you can fight and lose and not get anything. And I had at least
Yeah.
one person tell me, yeah, no, Helen's right. That's what you got to do. And I don't agree with that, but I'm glad I articulated the argument well enough that somebody else would think that.
Yeah. There's obviously so much about Hollywood. We've talked definitely about it. And again, that quote that was so moving was Hannah Hurd saying, "Everybody talks about how actresses are crazy. Nobody talks about how they got that way." And I'm thinking you could probably, move it to all child stars and Corey Feldman and the whole deal. And
Yeah.
so, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say, there's I don't like to say who this people are stand-ins for most of the time, but there is
Okay.
something I say in the book that I do mean to be about Corey Feldman, which is the way
Mm.
that we all laughed at him. That he's
Uh,
turned into this joke where we watch his music videos and we make fun of how crazy he's gotten. And obviously the quote from the book, it talks more about actresses, but again,
mhm.
Corey Feldman is a guy who's very open about the abuse that he suffered as a teen star, and then the way that he and Corey Haim tried to medicate their pain away with drugs, and so that if he is not well or if he's doing something, it's a quote from the book. I don't even remember who says it. It's like if we stood outside a nuclear power plant that was leaking and pointed at all the people with tumors and laughed at them.
Right. Yes.
And,
Yeah.
like as we're talking this, and I almost don't want to bring it up, but like the news about Jonathan Majors has just broken, and
Mm.
that apparently, a lot of times I know about these things before the news breaks, and
Okay.
it's exactly because of the stuff in the book of nobody talks but everybody whispers. I will say
Mhm.
this is one I had never heard personally,
Mm.
but apparently it was out there. Apparently now that he's been arrested, there's a lot of people going around saying, "Oh yeah, if you were in the New York theater scene at a certain
Mhm.
time, that everybody knows." And I think a lot of people want to think this stuff is done. That like,
Yeah.
Harvey Weinstein got arrested and case closed, and now we
Right.
can move on. But like, that's not the case.
Yeah.
And people are still protected until it doesn't make sense to protect them.
Mhm.
And that's another thing that I want to I try and say in the book very clearly is you want to think it's just, well, the truth comes out about somebody and then we're done. But that's not how it works.
Yeah.
It has to make sense for them to go down most of the time. Now, this might prove differently.
Right.
There are charges filed, but like there's just another case here in LA for another guy where charges were filed and then they were dropped, and who knows what's going to happen to that other guy,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so I don't know, I don't want to ever present my book as some kind of like moral thing,
Mhm.
because there are people doing actual good work in the world, not writing fun books to read that like walk the line between exploitative or not exploitative. I'm not trying to be exploitative, but I know
No.
I'm dealing in a space where, so anyway, I'm just saying that to say I'm not presenting my book as some kind of like moral document,
Right.
but I am trying to say things about this world, and I hope they're coming through.
They definitely are. Chris is the former cop. He works for that blackguard. Like, you can say nothing or everything, but like, what, I'm thinking of like, didn't Harvey Weinstein work with like like a satellite group or a like a subcontractor for like the Mossad?
A lot of these guys who come out of who get into private security, they tend to
Uh-huh.
come. There's a lot of special forces guys,
Yeah.
and Mossad is one of the major like groups that these guys come out of. Yeah, and Harvey
Right.
Weinstein definitely had ex Mossad guys working with him.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, I mean, Chris is such an interesting character. He's maybe early 40s, you know, just perfect age. I mean, that's where I'm at. Where
Mhm.
like, you know, he was a former police officer. He definitely did some more than morally ambiguous things. He's, you know, but he's at that age. He's not old, but you know, his knees hurting him. You know, those little things
Mm-hmm.
I thought were great little, you know, hints and clues and stuff that you put in there. But he does have a conscience. He tries to imagine, you know, what God would say to him. I don't
Yeah.
necessarily know that he's a religious person, right? But you know, he can definitely play the role of the tough guy, but with your great writing, you can tell it's mostly playing, right? That's
Yeah.
not mainly his main, you know, main characteristics, right?
Well, right. And I think with Chris, as you learn very early in the book, he was actually busted by a federal investigation to the sheriff's department, which happens fairly often here in Los Angeles. We have
Mm-hmm.
like a former sheriff in jail and things like that. But
Yeah.
like um and what I never raise in the book, but I think is probably true, is if he had never been busted, he never would have reformed, which
Yeah.
is not a statement about the powers of the legal system to do their job, because in fact he's let off of
Mm-hmm.
all charges and instead is kind of put in thrall to the people who saved him. And I think it's
Right.
that experience of being wrenched out of the world he was comfortable in and being thrust in another one, and now having to do these things where he still does the awful things, but he doesn't have any of that glow and shine of getting to be a cop and having other
Mm-hmm.
cops around, and all of
Yeah,
that is
yeah,
gone. And that is the unfortunate brew. And then meeting May, I think, are the things that
yeah.
happen to him that allow him to have a conscience that if he was still a sheriff's department deputy, I don't think he would be any different than the other sheriff's deputies that we meet in the course of this book.
Definitely. You in the Great LA Times piece about you, you'd said, you know, hey, this could be seen as a Me Too book, but like that's, you know, I don't want to put words in your mouth. That's not my place, more or
Yeah,
less, right? Other
yeah,
people
I
have
know.
done it.
Well, yeah, that's the thing is I there are people who write Me Too fiction. My friend Winnie M. Lee, who wrote the novel Complicit,
Hmm.
is a book I like to bring up in these cases because she is a very outspoken activist and former victim who, I don't know if that's the language she uses, but like who writes books that are about sexual assault and the power structures that protect people, and is very much a part of that specific conversation. And
Hmm.
I think that is a novel that is a Me Too novel. She will call it that. Now she's called Everybody Knows a Me Too novel, and I've told her, like, I don't call it that, but you can call it. She's free to call it that if that's how she
Sure.
sees it. But I think it's important for me personally, just for my own feeling of well-being, that I don't present myself as somebody who is a voice of Me Too, because I just don't
Sure.
think that's my place.
Right.
But I still want to write about the world I live in, and so I'm not saying that the topics are off limits to me. It's just I'm not going to position myself
Yeah.
as a spokesperson for a movement that I don't have the authority to be a spokesperson for.
No doubt. There's a really moving scene where Chris and May, they heard about another person unfortunately being a victim, a young woman being a victim of sexual abuse. And Chris says something to the effect of like, and I felt like it's almost like a stand-in for you or stand-in for so many men, in that like he was like, hey, I know that of the three of us, I understand it the least.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I thought that was so telling and honest. And yes, you know, we as men, we can't. We can't have that empathy. We can't have the 100% empathy. Maybe, you know, 99. And it's
We can get
not our
close.
place, right? It's not our place to 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 patronize about that, I guess.
Well, and that's why the character you're referring to, I made some pretty strong decisions. She is I not to write the cliched character, but also not to write a character that you would expect a man to write. But also,
Yeah.
it was very important to me that, like, there are certain moments where other writers might not zoom out, and I zoom out. And that scene
Mm-hmm.
is written from Chris's point of view, particularly because I knew I didn't want to zoom in on the story she was telling and get into like the
Yeah.
sordid details of it, because I just feel like that's just I'm not interested in zooming in on that part.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
not It's the fact that it happened, not the details of it. There are, again, other
Sure.
people who can write that story, and I'm not saying they can't. I'm just saying,
Hmm.
that's just not what I wanted. And I did want Chris's reaction to it, not because the male view is like the important one, but just because I thought that was the best way to get through that scene and anchor it and let everybody. You don't need to tell people that sexual assault is awful. Like, they know it. You don't have to linger in the details. And again, if
Right.
somebody else chooses to, I'm not a cop. I don't tell people how to write, but like,
Sure.
just for me personally, that's how I do it.
Just with Hollywood in general, kind of wrap up that little theme there. There's the just the PR machines, and again, so much of this is like microcosm, macro, like the micro, I should say, the macro, like what happens in Hollywood is often indicative of the whole world or the whole country, etc. But there's incredible, I guess, anecdote or metaphor about like the French will often eat the whole bird, right?
Mm-hmm.
They'll eat the bones and everything, but they'll put like a napkin over their head.
Yeah, it's a specific kind of bird, and I can't remember the name of it right now. It's this very tiny bird that they drown in some kind of liqueur,
Okay.
and then roast, and you just eat it whole, and it's considered um such a such a, almost a sacrilege to do this to this bird, that
Mm.
yes, you put the napkin over your head to hide your sin from God,
Oh,
essentially.
yeah.
And the idea being that May realizes that's her job, is basically to be that napkin,
Yep.
which I think works also because the napkin is just kind of symbolic, like a lot of this stuff is, that
Yep.
you hire somebody and they give a statement and it doesn't convince anybody, but it still has power to let
Hmm.
okay, I don't believe that statement, but I'm still going to act like I believe it because we need to keep filming this movie or whatever it
Yes.
is.
Yes. Yes. Oh man, so true. Yeah. I mean I think I just paused and thought of like there's so many different ways that napkin is representative, right? I mean, just of the world as a whole. So you talked about power. You make such an interesting distinction between power and visibility. They're not necessarily the same, right?
Well, yeah, power and visibility aren't the same. Power and responsibility aren't the same.
Hmm.
In fact, like May thinks like our job is to disconnect power from responsibility, which again is a thing that's very familiar to people in Hollywood, where there are people who have a lot of power, but should they fail, the blame somehow falls
Yes.
elsewhere.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of power, but there's somebody else scrambling behind the scenes to
Mm.
actually make everything happen.
Mm.
Uh, and that is the person who will get fired if it doesn't work.
Right?
So, and again, it's just like the general sense of power of like people who have their hands on the system, where they could maybe wrench it or tear it down or change it a little to maybe mitigate some harm,
Hmm.
but nobody expects them to,
No.
and they don't. Yeah.
No. Yeah, our English teachers, our writing teachers say, don't use the passive voice, but man, in those statements and those PR releases, right? There's so many just like put the blame somewhere else, not, just the blame's over there, it's not here, just so much passive voice was done by or was
Well,
received by, right?
or not to just keep harping on the cops thing, but like, and then you'll read a paragraph that is all active verb, active verb, active verb, and then an officer involved shooting occurred, and you're
Yes.
like, wait, what?
Yeah.
What does that mean? And it's such a yes. That is trying to remove responsibility. Like,
Hmm.
very actively, you can just see it happening in that phrase of like an officer involved, and
Yeah.
how involved? Like, involved in what manner? Like,
Right.
oh, as in they caused it to take place, that they pulled a trigger on a gun.
Yeah.
And like, again, all of that language is, and yes, you see it in legal filings, you see it in
Legal
courts,
filing.
you see it in any any poll or statement that a
Hmm.
politician makes.
Oh yeah.
People will look at you in the face, and they will tell you that this politician is not responsible for any of the bad things that happen under their
Um,
watch, and if you don't vote for them, the world will fall apart. And
Pretty
those
much.
can't be, like, either they're powerless or they're powerful. Like, you have to
Huh.
decide. If they're only responsible for the good things that happen, how
Mm.
does that work? Explain to me how that works, because
Yeah.
it feels like if you're responsible for the good things that happen, you're responsible for the bad things that happen.
You would think so, right? Hmm.
Yeah.
It's really interesting too about the book is, you talk about it being, morally ambiguous or not, it's there's not a lot of moral clarity because that's the world. That's the world. But just the idea of like sometimes people do bad things just because they want action. They're bored, right? Like Chris at times he feels fear that scares him, but also makes him feel alive.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, in what both of them do, May and Chris, they don't a lot of times they don't think too hard about the whys. And I think Dan, the mentor, even told May that, right? I think one of their first kisses, or one of the kisses that was chronicled in the book is, there's helicopters swarming the beach, some crazy police action, and they're just like, oh, this is cool,
Well, and it's specifically the police action because they have just staged the scene of a person's death, and they are watching the
God,
results
yes,
of that.
thank you. That's a huge detail left out. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
yeah, but it is true that I think it's important to me to complicate motives where if they just felt bad about what they did, that would not be interesting. But so you have to figure out the why.
Yes.
And again, as someone who works in Hollywood, there are moments where you're standing around going, "This is really cool." Like, you're on a film set and there's a famous person, and we're going to blow up a bus today, and this is really cool. And then that famous person yells at somebody for 30 minutes, and you don't do anything, and you feel awful. And then you go over to craft services and you eat something to eat your shame, and then you blow up a bus later, and it's really cool. So yeah, I just want to complicate it and make it clear that like these things aren't easy, and that that there's not that all pleasure is bad, but that sometimes bad things are pleasurable, and we have to like it's pleasurable for May to make money. Like she lusts after a house in Los Angeles, which is an expensive proposition.
Right.
She enjoys her life. There's it's not that she spends a ton of money on clothes, but it's clear that she likes clothes. She likes, her life. She likes her apartment in a cool part of town. Like these are all things that she has grown accustomed to, and they're nice,
The they talk a few times. They'd broken up, I don't know, years back before, and just things about like the life with like a capital L. Like, is it the life for each other? And a lot of readers would think, well, it doesn't necessarily have to be a binary thing, right? You can have both, but this idea of like action, and if they're gonna pursue the action, they're both gonna pursue it 100%, right?
Well, there's
No
that,
half
and then
stepping.
there's also the idea that I present that was so shocking to each other about each other is that they both live these lives of complete lies. And when they are with each other, they find that too difficult because they see each other too clearly.
Yeah.
They can't lie to each other, and that becomes a place that it's not tolerable for them, particularly May. And I think, I don't know if I stated explicitly, but I feel like she's the one who ended it the first time they dated.
Okay.
And
yeah.
And it's because like she can't tolerate it, and she has to choose like confronting all of these lies that are in her life and all the things that she's told herself to make her life permissible, or Chris. And there's nothing, she really loves Chris, but and that's a big ask. It's a big ask.
Yeah, it is.
And I think that's part of it. And I think that, there is also the fact that she does believe that she has a purpose, or at least a thing that she is good at. And whether she's doing it for good or evil, it's really the thing she's supposed to be doing.
Lastly, about the book, I'm someone who lived in LA for 13 years. Love LA, miss it. There's the action part of it. I mean, it's different when you're young and single.
Yes.
But there's definitely some there. You want to. I'm not a skier, but you want to go skiing. You're there in 2 hours. You want to go to the great Grammy Museum. You want to go to the beach. There's everything's there. Great cuisine. All of the above, art of all types. Is this like? I mean, the phrase is writ large. I don't know if it's writ small. Like, is the LA that you build, is this like America writ small? Like, did it have to be LA, in other words?
I mean, I've said this before in other contexts, but I do believe that LA is actually the great American city. And I think I would say it's America writ large. It is everything that makes America America turned up loud. People want to posit that like, oh, the middle of the country is America, which I find bullshit. Like, and I'm from there, and I'm sorry, that's like, America is cars. America is pollution. America is money. America is real estate. America is fame, and America is crime.
Yep.
And that is Los Angeles. New York City is like a holdover from Europe. It's a
Okay.
walkable. It feels more like a European city than Los Angeles is an American city.
Uh,
It's all based around cars. Like if it's not all based around cars, it's not an America. It's not the true American city.
sure.
Um, but again, it's just, and America is the drive west, the drive to keep
Hmm.
claiming land until we hit the ocean. And I think this is a phrase from my new book, but like Los Angeles is America with its back against the wall because
Ooh,
there's nowhere left to go.
I like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And and so yeah, I do think that for me it has to be Los Angeles, and it's Los Angeles because Los Angeles, exactly what I was saying about Pulp and Pulp's place at
Mhm.
telling the story better because it's louder and clearer, and you can just see it all happening because it's so bright and powerful.
Yeah.
That's Los Angeles. Los Angeles is America neon. It's
Mhm.
so that's why it's got to be that for me. And at least for the book I'm writing now, and I think the book after this, it's going to all be Los Angeles.
Yeah. Can you just wait for about a minute and a half? I'm just going to go ahead and erase that part so that I can use your line and say that I came up with it. Is that cool?
It's
No.
in the new book. I gotta
Right.
I gotta protect it. But
For those listening again, Google LASD gangs. That comes through. Obviously, is very LA, but unfortunately, a lot
yeah.
of police departments. But even the part about John Montez, and not gonna say a lot about him, but just like very realistic from what you've read and from what you hear, and people that I've known, younger people that I've worked with, like the idea of like the cow gangs and getting
Mm-hmm.
caught up in the system, right? And how it really can affect lives and how it's
Um,
often arbitrary. Yeah.
the story about John Montez, which his mother tells about him being
Hmm.
pulled over by a cop at a street race, and writing all these. The cop writes all these tickets and puts them in a gang
Yep.
registry. Aside from the part about putting him in a gang registry, I saw that happen to a kid. I was doing a ride
Whoa.
along with a sheriff in Compton, and we came on a street race, and kid got pulled over by this cop. This cop was chasing him. He wasn't one of the racers. He's one of the kids watching the race.
Yeah.
Got in his car and tried to drive away because the cops came in very loud, sirens blazing, and everybody ran, which is
Sure.
exactly what the cops wanted to happen. And this kid, the cop I was with, cop got on his ass, was pulling him over, and the kid panicked. It was clearly panic.
Hmm.
And he pulls into an oncoming off ramp, immediately recognizes what he's doing, and then backs up and turns around and pulls over. That was it. That was the car chase. And I watched this cop write this kid $3,000 worth of moving violations.
Oof.
Kid got out of the car, and this cop said his mom's going to lose the car over this.
Oh man.
And I didn't say shit. I'm not gonna act like I said shit. I was in the back seat of a cop car. I kept my
Uh-huh.
mouth shut, and I'm not proud of that. I'm not. Again,
Mm.
these are the kind of feelings that I'm trying to deal with
Yeah.
by writing these books. Is that I wish I'd said something. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know it wouldn't have changed anything, but I'd feel better about myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, so I saw that happen. So I know it happens.
Mm.
And, there's a lot of stuff in the news, particularly last year while I was writing this book or the year before, about cow gang registries and
Mhm.
how cops abuse them and just put people in because they're in a car with somebody else. So
Yeah.
like, and again, I think this is in the book, but like being in a gang is something you can catch from the air.
Hmm. Well, so we have Parker, who's a really interesting and shady and all the above character. He's like the city councilman, like in West Hollywood. He has some really interesting things to say, to say the least. But he talks about the city has no memory. He remembers when West Hollywood, when like the gay community would especially be targeted and chased. And he basically said, hey, the city has no memory, but I keep mine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just the dirtiness of politics where he's got blackmail on people, they've got it on him. I know that it definitely sounds similar to a case, right, to a case with one of the politicians in LA. And there's a lot there about power, almost like Harvey Weinstein type. In the end, you have this line that shows up, I think on one of the vegan menus, in Silver Lake or Echo
Mm.
Park, one of those. And it's similar to the napkin one, but it's we'll leave it here because it's very deep, and it's so much to say about this incredible book. And it's, quote, "We cannot escape the violence inherent in eating."
Yeah. I I really did that. That is something I did not see on a wall in Atwater Village, which that scene is set in Atwater, which
Yeah.
is my old neighborhood. While I was writing this book, I was living in Atwater. That's a real restaurant, but that phrase is actually something I read on a wall in a restaurant in Portland, and I
Uh,
saw it on a wall and I wrote it down. Like I am using this in a book because I think again, I guess that's true. I think people would argue that's true, but like I think people can use a statement like that to justify a lot of things that might not be inherent in
Right.
eating, you know. And
Inherent's the key word. Yeah.
yeah, inherent and all that it implies. Like again, uh, we like to come up with these phrases that we can say, you know, oh, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, so I'm going to do whatever I want because
Yeah.
there's nothing ethical I can do.
Right.
I feel bad about it. Again, is the yes.
Right.
So, but you're right. That is a key phrase, and I'm glad you noticed that. Yeah.
Well, you know, it is a book that I mean, you say straight out is it's about moral, there's more ambiguity, there's no moral clarity, there's not a lot at least, but it's a book that makes you think so much about the micro, about the macro. For those of us who are interested in, you know, in Hollywood or politics, all the above. Like I said, I mean, it's clear that you are a writer just in you're like in your Michael Jordan, like 1993, 1994, whatever, you know, his prime was. And you know, just thanks so much for talking to me. It's been a pleasure. And everybody knows is so freaking good.
Well, thank
And
you.
I cannot wait to go back. I got to go back and read She Rides Shotgun. I read the first couple pages and that description of the kind of like the shot caller in prison.
Mm-hmm.
Damn,
Thank you.
that is characterization like I've never. I mean, that was incredible. So just
Thank
you
you.
know, I'm rambling here, but just again want to thank you so much and wish you great luck and thanks for kind of letting us get into the lab a little with you and talking about the rationale in the background.
Thank you so much. This was a great conversation. These were great questions. I really appreciate it.
Continue great luck to you.
Thank you. You too.